Welcome, bienvenue. My name is Renee Ketchum, and I curate the cultural events for AFUSA. Welcome to a discussion on the Rebel Empresses by Nancy Goldstone. AFUSA is the largest Alliance Française network in the world, helping 26,000 learners of French each year to learn French, live French, and love French. Take a look at our video. Stay tuned for some of our fabulous national events coming soon. So log in to afusa.org and learn more about our incredible French Cinematheque program with Peter de Bruges, the chief film critic at Variety. We had 250 registrants this week for the Count of Monte Cristo. We have Roger Mummert coming back and many, many wonderful programs. So please register at www.afusa.org. I'm thrilled to introduce Nancy Goldstone, author of 7 previous books, including In the Shadow of the Empress, The Defiant Lives of Maria Theresa, mother of Marie Antoinette, and her daughters. Nancy has also co-authored 5 books with her husband, Lawrence Goldstone. They live in Del Mar, California. Amanda Foreman is a British-American biographer and historian. Her books include Georgiana, Duchess of Devonshire, A World on Fire, and The World Made by Women. Currently, Amanda is a columnist for the Wall Street Journal biweekly, Historically Speaking, and an honorary research senior fellow in the history department of the University of Liverpool. Welcome, Nancy. Welcome, Amanda.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it's such a pleasure to be able to welcome Nancy to this conversation. I have to confess, Nancy, that I've always wondered whether you have a sneaking fascination with mothers. The good ones and the bad ones. And so I thought I might begin this conversation with sort of asking you to tell a little bit about yourself for our audience here, and how you came to this particular subject. But I'd love you to weave it in within this larger theme, which has really run through your books.
Well, I'm the person who writes about all the most important and influential women in European history who nobody's ever heard of. And it all started years ago. I was leafing through a medieval chronicle, and I stumbled across a reference to a family of 4 13th century sisters, the daughters of the Count of Provence, who all became queens. Queen of France, Queen of England, Queen of Germany, and Queen of Sicily, all at the same time. Very cool. And I was immediately intrigued, and I wanted to learn more about them. So I hunted around for a book about them, and I hunted around and I hunted around and I hunted around. And eventually I realized that if I wanted to read about these women, I was going to have to write the book myself. So that's what I did. And I went from there. I finished that book. I said, wow, I wonder if there are any other important or influential women in European history who no one has ever heard of. And I went into the next century, the 14th century, and sure enough, boom, boom, boom. 14th century, 15th, I've gone up century by century, because you actually have to know what happened in the century before to understand the century that you're in. And all the way up until I can hardly believe it myself, I'm in the 19th century. And along the way, I began to understand that it isn't enough to just do the biography. I do narrative history. I don't do biography. I'm trying to provide context. And to provide context in many of these families, you're going to need the whole family, or you're going to need someone else. And a lot of mothers and daughters, you have a strong mother, you're going to have strong daughters, or the daughters are going to play out what happens to the mother. And that's why there's so much mother and daughter in my books. And Sissy was no exception. And Eugénie.
That's right. It's almost as if what you're saying is that when historians write about men, they turn them into figures in a play. So if you go to a play, there's only going to be 3 or 4 characters on the stage, and the king or whoever it is, your subject, they have the whole stage. But when people write about women, they're in the background, and because they're in the background, you can only do it as women in context.
Right.
Because their words have been taken from them, their letters have been taken from them, their speeches, whatever. So how else can you show what they have done except through the context? And that's what you have done. You've brought them out through context.
Right. You're not going to understand in this book, Rebel Empresses, you're not going to understand Empress Elisabeth, who goes by her, more familiarly by her nickname of Sissy, who's the Empress of Austria. You're not going to understand her unless you understand also Empress Eugénie, because who's Empress of the French. You need both of them to see what is really going on in the world. And
So that's what I was going to say. So because it's quite interesting to have, a dual biography, as it were, narrative history of the 2 women. I mean, when that often happens, it's like, Hitler and Stalin, dual biography. But it's rare and quite rare. I've never come across this before, where Sissi and Eugénie have been compared in this way, and written about in this integrated way. And you never you never prioritize one over the other, which is really, really fascinating. And so I wondered how it is that you first came across each of them, and how you managed to, these 2 women, love them both, which is what you do. And how is that? Because that's quite an interesting, that's unusual.
Well, that's thank you. Empress Elisabeth Sissy, I came across when 2 books ago, or I was in Prague researching an earlier book. I walked out of the castle in Prague into a bookstore, which I love to do. I walked through the bookstore, and all of a sudden there was a book facing out with a picture of a woman who looked like she was in a good fairy princess gown with diamond stars in her hair, and I like a cartoon character. I literally stopped and did a double take, and I didn't think she was real. I said, who's that? It was this little teeny children's bio. I think it was like for kids. And I bought it and realized she was an empress, and looked a little bit into her. And I said, oh, this woman I have to learn something about. And as soon as I looked at her and I looked at Austria, I knew I wanted also to do, you had to do France. I'd finished France before, and Eugénie, she just leaps out at you also. And the way they had to use their glamour to get, they really put it up as an armor almost, and used it to sell, or not to sell, but well, Eugénie used it to sell French goods, but also to help with their political views. And it was they ended up, I didn't even know when I started, but they end up being so close at the end, from being in 2 conflicting empires. They are the only 2 women in Europe who have the exact same experience from the other sides. And so that is a bond they have at the end that no one else has, which was very,
yeah. And it's a terrible, terrible bond.
Tragic. Yes, terrible.
So let's start with Sissi. Let's begin with her, Elisabeth of Austria. Can you just give us?
Why don't we put up the picture of the image of Sissi on the screen? First, it's the second. We'll get back to that one. So, so this is Empress Elisabeth Sissi when she is a few years into her marriage. We don't know too much about her here in America, but in Germany, this woman is a rock star. They got a film comes out about her almost every year. She has 2 German language series running at the same time, one on Netflix and one on PBS. And that's because she's kind of their Princess Diana. she's the high-spirited beauty who defies the imperial family and goes on to totally eclipse them with her celebrity. And I will say that that Sissy does have the story does have some parallels to Diana, because Diana once gave this bombshell of an interview on BBC in which she blamed her problems on the fact that there were 3 in her marriage and it was kind of crowded. And of course, she was referring to Camilla Parker Bowles, who is today Queen Camilla, who was the longtime mistress of Diana's husband, Prince Charles. So that was a kind of a betrayal that Diana was talking about. And Sissy too she also has 3 in her marriage, but there's a little twist to it this time. Sissy is the first person in the marriage. Can we go to the next slide, please? This is her husband, Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria. This is when he was first married. He's a handsome young prince of 23. He's the second person in the marriage. And the third person in this marriage, can we have the next slide, please? Is this woman right here. This is Archduchess Sophia, Franz Joseph's mother. Do not be deceived by this sweet, simpering little old lady look on her face. This woman's a barracuda. She is ruthless. That face organized a military coup in which she deposed not only her brother-in-law, the emperor, but also her own husband, who was legally in line next for the throne. She just retired him right out of the way in order to put in her 18-year-old son, eldest son, Franz Joseph, as a figurehead. And then she and her generals, they declared martial law and instituted an autocratic regime all over the empire that was so repressive and so frankly vindictive that the Tsar of Russia protested. And do you have any idea how brutal you have to be for the Tsar of Russia to think you are barbaric? It's just and that wasn't the only thing she did. She also, she didn't like the way the 19th century was going. You know, there were all these new ideas about people having constitutions and workers' rights and people's rights. She didn't like that at all. She's a devout Catholic. She wants to turn the clocks back 2 decades or so. She reinstitutes the Inquisition in Austria through the empire. Suddenly in Austria, there is no freedom of religion. Forget Jews. Not even Protestants are allowed to worship openly. There's no intermarriage between Protestants and Catholics. The Jesuits take over the educational system and begin banning books. And they don't burn you at the stake anymore, but there are courts of inquisition where you can be hauled up for doing something wrong and or heretical, and you can be fined, you can be jailed, you can be you can be deported. They can close you down. So this woman, look at her. This is Vladimir Putin in a bonnet. And this is going to be Sissy's mother-in-law.
It's so fascinating, though, because it's like she's a composite of 2 different women. An early woman, Catherine the Great, who, of course, she too instituted a coup against her husband in order to become empress. And
Right.
And also Sarah Roosevelt, Franklin Roosevelt's mother, because of course poor Eleanor Roosevelt married into this family where she too had no power for years and years and had to defer to her mother-in-law, who, you know, had her bedroom next to theirs in order to supervise the children, and really interfered with the upbringing of the young Roosevelts. I think in the perhaps not quite as a vindictive way as Sophia did, but so what is it then about this kind of situation? Do you think is it emotional, purely emotional? Is it the product of frustrated and thwarted desires and anger that gets turned directional into the family itself? How does this kind of tyranny in the family come about, do you think?
It's very, Archduchess Sophia, she had a vision. She wanted to make sure, usually they feel like they're protecting when they behave like this. They're protecting themselves and their family. This happened often also with Catherine de' Medici. Remember, she organized the St. Bartholomew's massacre by marrying her daughter. She wanted to get rid of the Protestants. She married her daughter, Catherine.
Henry of Navarre, exactly.
Right, and then murdered everybody on the groom's side of the family, and that is because they're protecting themselves, and she believes she is protecting her family, and this is the right way to do it. They're people today think that they are saving America by banning books and doing all these things. This is their point of view, and she wasn't going to let a little Sissy is not even royal. She's related to the Bavarian royal family, but she comes in as a 15-year-old, 16-year-old. I showed you what Sissy looked like before. Can we go to the next slide, please? No, there should be, yeah, the one with the little photo, that one. So this is actually what Sissy looked like when she was married. Oh, she's 15. She's the equivalent to a sophomore in high school. She's, believe me, that I don't believe any of that. Girls mature faster than boys. They don't. She was never supposed to marry an emperor. She's totally unprepared. It's the 19th century, so she has no idea what she's getting into. She can't just check her phone and her social media to see what's going on in the world. She barely knows where the Austrian Empire is when she comes into this family. And on top of that, she has a much more liberal background because although she's born in Munich on Christmas Eve in 1837, Munich is the capital of Bavaria. Bavaria gets a bad reputation today because of World War II, but back when Sissy was growing up, it was pretty progressive for the time. In Bavaria, they had a king, yes, but they also had a constitution. They had freedom of religion. In fact, the king was a Catholic married to a Protestant queen. Even Jews had rights in Bavaria. They had freedom of the press. They had an elected assembly that had some, where they had a way to control a little bit the king. So she comes from a much more liberal background. And on top of that, her father is like, he's just this artist, not an artist, but he was a very liberal guy. He wrote articles for the paper. He was a zither player. He loved the poetry. What he really loved was the poetry of Heinrich Heine, who was the kind of the Bob Dylan of his day, a rebel poet. And that is who Sissy was when she walked into this marriage. So you can see that this is going to be, there's a struggle coming up here. And the reason that it turns kind of epic and becomes basically a struggle for the soul of the empire is because of Franz Joseph supports he's right in there with his mother. He believes in autocracy, and every time there's a decision, he backs his mother rather than his wife. And it's going to take Sissy a really long time to which she will overcome in the end, and she will win this. And it was one of the great, you keep waiting for her to do it, but it's one of the great moments. But oh, she pays a terrible, terrible price for it. And so yes, I can only have sympathy for a 15-year-old who is basically thrown to the wolves this way.
Yes, well, I'd love you to give us some of those anecdotes that you tell about, when she gives birth and she has to ask permission to enter her own nursery. I mean,
so Archduchess Sophia does not want Sissy to raise the children. First of all, Sissy gives 2 girls to start with, and they only want her. Archduchess Sophia's idea is that her daughter-in-law is just there to have produce a male heir, and that's why she chose this. I mean, it's the idea that they went to Sissy's family and to get a bride. That's not what the Emperor of Austria is supposed to marry a princess of of high rank, so he can bring in alliances and have military help or economic or whatever. But Archduchess Sophia doesn't want that, because then she might have to actually listen to somebody else's opinion. The other family might get involved. She wants somebody she can just control. She can control Sissy's. She takes her children and raises them herself. Sissy cannot, for about 10 years, cannot even change her own ladies in waiting. She cannot, and this is all because her husband is allowing this, because by this time, Franz Joseph is not, he's not a figurehead. He is running the government. He just happens to agree with everything his mother says. And he lets this happen, which was completely unusual in the period. No one had ever taken someone's children in the that I went through the centuries with in Austria, and none of them had ever, nobody took Archduchess Sophia's children when she was, and raised them when she was there. No one, and certainly no one took Maria Theresa's. I mean, I'd have liked to see them try. But so this was a completely unusual situation that Sissy, she doesn't have to just fight her mother-in-law, she's got to fight her husband as well. And that's very hard. That's really hard.
So with these challenges, I mean, one of the theories, as you say, is, you know, she became an anorexic, and suffered a really severe, you know, from eating disorders. And I wondered if you wanted to comment on that.
It's not today. We understand, you know, we understand that when you're younger, especially a young woman, when you have a lot of stress, you can develop an eating disorder. They didn't understand that back then. They thought she's faking it. She's clearly not faking it. But she has to learn herself how to make herself better. And she does. One thing that she has is she was such an amazing athlete. That was another thing. I mean, to take an amazing athlete like Sissy, who could spend all her time riding horses, you know, and running around outside. She could walk for miles. To take her and put her into this environment where all she had to do was sit, learn French phrases in a room and with her ladies in waiting. It was like taking you know, a wonderful basketball player in high school and making her just stop and sit in a room. Also, this kind of avenue was not open to her until she got older and could exert some control over her own life. Took a long time. But
So we're going to move to Eugénie in a minute, but I just would love to use the turning point in Cece's life as a pivot then to Eugénie's. And so, you know, you mentioned earlier about the fact that, you know, after it took her 10 years to have any kind of agency over her children. And so do you want to just enlarge on how that happens? Because, you know, and how she reacted and how the children reacted.
right. So Sissy eventually does have a son. Usually it takes like 5 years. Usually when once an empress is given a son, then you get your power. You know that, but that didn't, of course, didn't happen with Sissy. Archduchess Sophia takes the son. His name is Rudolph. And Rudolph is a very sensitive child. He's a lot like Sissy and not like his father, Franz Joseph, who is Stefan Zweig, the author, said, who grew up when under Franz Joseph, said he never read a book in his life. He has no imagination, Franz Joseph. And this family, Sissy, and they're all imagination. They're all creativity, and Rudolph got that from her. But he's going to be made into the emperor. He's the heir to the throne. He's the heir to the empire. He's got to be a soldier. They have him in a little outfit. When he's first born, basically, they have a little they make him a captain, or they give him his own regiment when he's born. That's everything, is to make him into a soldier and to make him into somebody very disciplined. And to do that, they had tutors that were very very repressive and very severe with him, and he was becoming almost ill from it. And finally, Sissy, in order to, this is how difficult it was for her to gain any agency, was that she had to actually write down a document that said if she was not given control of her son, of the children's lives and of her own, she would leave. And once you put something in writing, that by that time she understood this was such a bureaucratized empire that Franz Joseph could ignore things unless they were in writing. If they weren't in writing and they went up through the channels, then he had to make a decision, and that's how she gains her control of the children. And Rudolph credited her with saving his life, because his tutor was so cruel to the child. He would try to scare him. He would wake him up in the middle of the night. The kid was only 5 or 6 years old, and he's having nightmares because he's got to be already brave. They throw him out, outside the gates and say a bear is coming. I mean, it's just ridiculous stuff. So that's when she finally gets it back. But that is not common. And that's why you need to go to Eugénie. That was not a common thing for this period. These people had a vision. This court wanted to turn the clocks back. We have a little of that going on today. They want to turn the clocks back to a different time. This usually doesn't work out very well.
So moving on to Eugénie then, I mean, completely different, I mean, at this point. And so would you just like, first of all, let's introduce her and her background, and then how she ended up with Louis Napoleon.
Right. Well, let's go to the first slide, okay? The one, go backwards all the way to the party one. Yes.
Oh,
okay. So this is a portrait of one of Empress Eugenie's little intimate dinners for 500 or so that she hosted every Monday evening during the social season in Paris throughout her almost 2-decade reign that is known today as the French Second Empire. And I just have to tell you, let's just look at that, okay? The gowns, the jewels, the setting, the spectacle. And it wasn't just the arts. It was also it wasn't just the parties. It was the arts, theater, science. Please trust me when I tell you that the French Second Empire makes the American Gilded Age look like the Real Housewives of Cleveland. All right, this was just a beautiful time in French history, and Eugénie is at the top of it. So how did she get there? Let's go back to go down the slides again. Not to there. Okay, so this is Eugénie. This is when she is first married and engaged. This is a real. This is a pretty good portrait of her. You can see right away the difference between she and Sissy are married within a year of each other, so they start their reigns at almost exactly the same time. But you can see there's a difference. If you just go back a second again to Sissy when she was first married, right? So that's Sissy when she's first married. Move forward to Eugénie, please. So you can see right away the difference is Eugénie's an adult. All right, she's in her 20s. She can hit the ground running. She doesn't have any of Sissy's problems. Her mother-in-law's dead. And even though her husband's family hates her and thinks they married beneath her and married beneath them and works against her, her husband actually supports her. We just go to the next slide real quick, please. So this is her husband, Napoleon III. He's Emperor of the French. We don't know too much about him here in America, but he's the nephew of the great Napoleon Bonaparte, the world conqueror Napoleon. That's who this man is. And he comes to power in 1852 in Paris and in France. And he is unmarried in his 40s and needs a bride right away. And because he needs a legitimate male heir. This man has not inherited any of his uncle's military skill, but this guy's an Olympiad at adultery later. So I will tell you that at least 300 pages of my book is just a litany of the gossip of this guy's affairs. But he needs a wife right away. But one thing he's good at is he has a vision for France, just like Archduchess Sophia and Franz Joseph wanted to turn the clocks backward. This man wants to go forward. It's the middle, it's 1852, it's the middle of the Industrial Revolution. There's all these amazing technological changes going on. There's railroads for the first time. There's the telegraph, which just revolutionizes communications. There's factories, and what he wants to do is he wants to harness all of that, and he wants to move France and modernize France and make it the center of Europe, culturally, economically, politically, militarily. He wants France to lead, and he needs an equal partner to help him do this, a much more equal partner. And he ends up with Eugénie. Let's go back to Eugénie, please. Right. So how did he get to her? Eugénie is not even French. She's Spanish. She's born on May 5th, 1826 in Granada, which is the town in southern Spain where they have the magnificent Alhambra Palace, which is great to look if you want to go see. She has an unusual parentage, though. Her father is member of one of the oldest and most prestigious families in Spain. Those families are called, in Spain, they call these ancient, hugely wealthy, hugely politically connected families grandees. So her father is a grandee. On her mother's side, significantly less impressive lineage. Her mother is the daughter of a penniless Scotsman who emigrated to southern Spain as a young man, got a job as an apprentice in a wine shop, and was enterprising, did that enterprising age-old technique of marrying the boss's daughter and taking over the business and get ahead. So, but he does do very well. That's where she gets the red in her hair. They do very well. Her mother is actually educated in Paris, and her mother is a very cultured, educated, and beautiful woman who loves artists and writers and wants to run salons. So when she marries Eugénie's father, she gets the money and the title, and she's going to become one of the great society hostesses of Madrid. And that's where Eugénie learns to throw a party, basically. So you can see where she would be helpful that way. But her mother was not the major influence on her. Her father was, and her father was a very romantic figure. She adored him. He died early. He was an international war hero, complete with dashing black eye patch, and he is, but in a twist, even though he is a grandee of Spain, he fights for the first Napoleon Bonaparte. He idolizes Napoleon Bonaparte, and so he joins the French army, and he teaches his daughter to also idolize the Napoleonic legacy. Their first language is French in the family, even though they live in Spain, and she is educated in France. And so that is how she comes to, eventually she comes to Paris, and Napoleon III will see her.
So what I find really fascinating about, one of the things I find fascinating about Eugénie is that, you know, officially she's not allowed any role at all in politics, and yet she's absolutely consequential, because 2 years after her marriage, you know, she and Louis Napoleon go to London, and it's an incredibly important diplomatic visit. And you know, Louis Napoleon could be charming, but the real charmer here is Eugénie, and how she turns Queen Victoria, who could have been a potential enemy, into a friend. And I would love to hear your elaboration on that, because it really, and you know, this is a turning point in Anglo-French relations.
It is, and Queen Victoria made them, because when Napoleon III and Eugénie first start out 2 years before, they are not considered serious. They are not considered legitimate, because Napoleon III actually takes over France in a coup. But I will say about him, it was different. He did have his vision, and also after he took over in the coup, within 2 months, he threw it open to an election and said, you can toss me out if you want. And they voted 7 million to 100,000 to keep him in. And that was a legitimate, I went through that very carefully. That was a legitimate election. He had the people behind him. He had the country behind him. They had come from a second republic, and they did not want a republic. They were not ready for a republic yet. They wanted to go back to the time of a monarch. So that was more legitimate. But the rest, Austria is looking at this and going, another Napoleon? Germany is saying, another Napoleon is the last thing we need. And Victoria makes them legitimate, because what happened was, at the same time that Eugénie and Napoleon III come to power, the Tsar of Russia decides to try and take over Crimea. And Britain and so the Crimean War starts, and France and England are united because they want to keep the Black Sea open to the British Navy. And Napoleon III is threatening to go over to Crimea and help run his own army there. Victoria doesn't want that. She wants England to shine over there, and she's afraid that he'll eclipse them. So to keep him from going, she invites Napoleon III and Eugénie to Windsor to be accepted by the British family, and it's a huge state visit, just huge for them. So, but I will say, she loved Eugénie, but she thought Napoleon III was great too, because Napoleon III, he's a good actor and he can put it on, and she just thought he was going to be her best friend. And she learns quickly that that's not going to be the case, but she and Eugénie, she was always such a great friend to Eugénie. She protected her. She understood, and I think Victoria was a very good judge of character, actually. So in spite of everything that France did afterwards, she knew that it wasn't Eugénie. That was not what Eugénie wanted to do. So that's what happened there. But she made them. Otherwise, they would not have. They got a lot of that in winning the Crimean War. That made them Napoleon III at the top of a world power again.
But then again, I mean, when Victoria and Albert do the reverse and go and visit Paris, that royal visit is a huge success. And again, it's Eugénie who's playing such an important role. And even if some French themselves resent her for what they consider to be extravagance and all that kind of thing, it is that show which is the secret sauce that makes it all work and cements France's grandeur on the world stage, don't you think?
Yes, totally. All of their efforts were entirely in service to the French economy. Excuse me, Eugénie's signature look is the hoop skirt, this cage crinoline with this huge amount of material. The textile industry was huge in France. That was all the luxury goods. That's what they sold, France. That's what they needed to make the economy go. And it worked, because she would be the style icon of Europe for almost 2 decades. Sissy wears French clothes. She wears clothes based on what Eugénie was not just based on it. It's French material. It's French seamstress. It's French. It's Eugénie's designer. everyone from Queen Victoria to Mary Todd Lincoln tried to dress like Eugénie, and that it was in service to the economy. And also, when Victoria comes, makes the return visit. One of the things that Eugénie and Napoleon III started was something called the Exhibition Universelle, which was a World's Fair, basically. And this is where they showcase all French clothes, but not just clothes, but French goods and French science, but not just theirs, internationally. And if you looked at the Olympics, even though the empire falls and the Second Empire falls, and it's, they don't acknowledge it at all in France really anymore. Nonetheless, they kept that. Eugénie and Napoleon III, they started those World's Fair, and you can see a direct line to the Paris Olympics, really. That kind of show, that was the show they put on to show that Napoleon III and Eugénie put on, and it was mostly her with the parties, to make it look, to make France into a cultural center of Europe. So there is I looked at that and I said, that would have been them putting that on today.
Absolutely. So now, at this point, these women couldn't seem to have more different lives. And then let's bring them together in the parallels. Do you want to start with Mayerling? Should we start?
Let's go down, we'll go down can we go one more? I just have to talk about this guy, okay? Because when the empire falls, Eugénie is in Paris. She's regent. The community, the city turns on her. She's in grave danger. I know he doesn't look like it, but this is a hero. This guy is Lancelot and the Count of Monte Cristo rolled into one. This is Eugénie's American dentist, Dr. Thomas Evans, and how the American Dental Association does not have this guy on their website as the poster boy for dentists, I'll never know. But if you are ever, be nice to your dentist, because if you are ever attacked by a Holly mob, you never know when you're going to need your dentist. We'll go on now to the next. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, so Mayerling. I was obsessed by Mayerling. This is Sissy's son. So Sissy eventually has the one son, right? He was the one who was tortured by his tutors, and she gets the tutors away. She gets control of his education, and she gives him very liberal tutors, like she had when she was that had a more progressive attitude towards the empire and towards government, just like she had. And his father is still very conservative, but she did educate him this way. And when he is 32 years old and he's married, he has a daughter. In the scandal of the century and the unsolved crime of the century, suddenly he is discovered in January of 1889, dead in the bedroom of his hunting lodge at Mayerling. And beside him is can you do the next slide, please? Beside him is his 17-year-old mistress, Baroness Mary Wetzera, who is also dead. And this was a crime that just gripped. Let's go back to Rudolph for a second. This is a crime that it was international. It was in the papers here. It was in the papers in England. It was in the papers in France, everywhere. And the court is desperately trying to suppress the scandal. They are suppressing the evidence. They are throwing out misinformation. And it was a crucial time because for Austria, because this is the moment basically when Rudolph would have taken them closer towards France and England, and now the conservative side, which is aligned with Prussia, has the upper hand really forever. And we know what Prussia is going to lead him into World War I and World War II. So this was such a critical moment, and he's dead out of nowhere. And so the question was this a double suicide for love? Was this a murder-suicide, or was this a political assassination? And boy, that just gripped me when you know all the people, and so, and it was, you kind of figure it out. It's in the book, but he dies tragically, and Sissy is just bereft at this. And the thing is that Eugénie's son only had one son also, and her son also dies tragically. He dies, oh God, he dies when so in the Britain had been fighting a war with the Zulus, and he was so desperate to make his name for himself as a Napoleon that her son begged to go and fight on the side of the British against the Zulus. And eventually Queen Victoria, Eugénie went to Victoria, and Victoria made an arrangement that he could go and join the army. And he's there, he's not even there a month before he is part of a small party of men who are attacked by the Zulus, and he is left behind and he is killed by the Zulus. And so Eugénie and Sissy have this so much in common. And in fact, the only way we really know what happened at Meyerling is because Sissy told Eugénie what happened. And Eugénie had that information all this time, but nobody ever looks at her, so nobody really knows before this what happened to both in that.
I mean,
bedroom.
Queen Victoria felt so guilty. I mean, she actually, received the news before Eugénie, and
I know.
Yeah, well, of course, and
I feel that I felt she tried so hard not to. They sent an emissary to tell her, but the news got to her before. Oh, it was just a terrible, terrible thing.
Yeah, I mean, it really is, because at that point Eugénie is she's in exile, she's in England, she can't go back. I mean, all she has is her son and
I know, and then nothing. So they just end up, both of them, one of them out of power, who has been deposed basically, and the other one who deliberately just doesn't want to do it anymore. And they come together at the end. Oh, it was just, I couldn't, it was just, they each had their strengths and they each had their weaknesses, but you can only feel sympathy for both of them.
And of course, I think you should tell what happened to Sissy in the end.
Yeah, so on top of everything, so she actually, Eugénie had more political power during her reign, and she wanted so badly to do good for France, and she did a lot of good things. She was always so much charity. She gave charity. She visited hospitals. She's changed the whole child prison system, which was great. But Eugénie's main accomplishment was terrible. She tried to take over Mexico because she's listening to, she learned about foreign policy from her husband, and this was the time of imperialism, and so that was that was something, and she always took the blame for it, and she said it was my fault, Mexico, and she was right. Sissy, who wanted nothing to do with politics, actually ends up saving the empire because she helps negotiate the only really the time in the whole century that I could find where political differences were resolved without recourse to violence, when she comes up with when she helps Hungary and Austria come together in the dual monarchy, whereby Hungary gets its own government, but remains within the within the Austrian Empire, which is, I have to say, if Victoria had done that with Ireland, which was asking for home rule at the same time, then you might have saved all this trouble later. But this happened. So Sissy's accomplishment is huge, but they hate her for it in Austria. So she just quits basically and wanders the world. And here's somebody who actually dedicated her life to try, wanted to help the poor and wanted to help loosen the autocracy, that the repression that Austria had, and she ends up being murdered by by an assassin who just it was I call them the disciples of the dagger. She dies for nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, that destructive tendency. I mean, of course, let's not forget that Queen Victoria never had that kind of political control or influence. I mean, in the parliamentary system, she couldn't.
Right, of course, she didn't, but I don't. She
Yeah.
would, but she didn't work towards it. Did she? She didn't work towards it either.
She did not. She absolutely did not. Funnily enough, I mean, I think Queen Victoria had about 7 or 8 assassination attempts at her, but she survived them all. But so we have Eugénie, who has a rather tragic life in exile, which, you know, for a monarch is a kind of a living death. And then poor Sisi, who actually is killed. So these two women, these two extraordinary women who are fighting against the forces of patriarchy, autocracy, bad luck itself. Their memory lives on, but they themselves are crushed by it.
Right, right. And
but fascinating stories.
Yeah. So, do you have it? Are there any questions, or no one has questions?
I think everybody, Nancy, I think everybody is just riveted by your conversation with Amanda, that they haven't had time to even think of a question. So if you guys, if you want to continue with your slides, I think everyone would love to continue to hear your voices.
Well, we went through the slides, but we can certainly talk about one thing that we didn't talk about was kind of like the legacy of both of these women. Sissy's legacy is very personal, which I found interesting, that she kind of anticipated the coming women's emancipation on a personal level. That I always think of her as being the first person in the story, The Awakening, the book by Kate Chopin. The Awakening is going to come, where in 19, and Sissy had an awakening kind of. Sissy does not believe in marriage the way everyone has, because of the way she got married and what her experiences were. She wants to not be married anymore in the traditional way. So she basically leaves her husband most of the time, but it's a very modern approach, because she gets him a substitute. She introduces Franz Joseph to a young actress, and this actress takes over towards the end of her life, takes over all of the marital duties that Sissy is no longer wants to do. She gets she says she basically says, I would die for my children, but I can't live for them. And she just wants to pursue she tries to pick up her old life as if she had never been. She doesn't believe in the monarchy that she married into. This is kind of that women should not have to get married if they don't want to, and that kind of thing. And Eugénie, she also fell early under the spell of a French philosopher who said, who was a utopian socialist, who said that it was a fringe theory at the time, and said that women should have equal rights and opportunity to men, and that societies that don't give women equal rights and improve the lives of women fall behind, and those that do it will succeed. And so her whole life, Eugénie, she supported women's rights. She tried to bring education to women, higher education. She tried to make sure they had skills, that they didn't have to rely on men to get married, that they could get jobs, that they got equal recognition for what they did. She was one of the first person to get a woman into the salon. So then this is 50 years before it's even fashionable. That's
So
something
true.
that what?
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, these are extraordinary accomplishments. And if we could just go back for a minute to the Henri Baron slide, I think it's the first one
The
of
first one?
the Tuileries, that lovely the watercolor,
Party
the
at the
party.
very beginning.
Yes,
Yes.
because one of the fascinating things I think about that watercolor is that the women are the most interesting things in that picture. I mean, they're the most interesting subjects. The men, they are, they all kind of look the same, but it's the women and what they're wearing and what they're doing, and they're full of life. And the men are listening. It's the women who are talking. And so, you know, there's a sort of message that's going on throughout the beginning from the mid 19th century onwards, that there is this dynamic force, and it's a female dynamic force, and Eugénie and Cece in their own ways are both, they reflect that, they are part of that, and they are being crushed by it to some extent because of the expectations placed on them, and then the restrictions that are also placed on them at the same time, and that push pull. And in a funny way, that's what you see in that Tuileries watercolor, is all of those contradictions in place at the same time. And don't you agree, Nancy?
I do, and that's a great way to say it. Thank you. This is when we're going to have haute couture. This is when the telegraph and the railroads, it all comes together, because suddenly suddenly you can have foreign correspondents, and they are so interested in what the women are categorized as just being glamorous, and that's what their readers want to read about. We still have that today, and the railroads means travel comes more, so you can bring the culture home to you. This picture was emulated everywhere. Franz Joseph remakes, he doesn't have any imagination, believe me. Franz Joseph remakes Vienna based on what Napoleon III did with Paris, and these things last even to this day. This is what makes these cities so romantic to us. And it needed somebody with that kind of energy to do it.
Oh yes, you can see you can see elements of the Gilded Age in this watercolor as well. I mean, the Vanderbilts wouldn't have looked out of place, and
Yes, but instead of having a storyline that says, who will go to which opera, we have who will take over Mexico, what are we going to do with Italy? I mean, all these forces are coming to play at the same time, and these women have to deal with that, as opposed to, in addition to all the general gossip kind of things they have to deal with. It was an unbelievable period. I love doing the research.
Nancy, if I could just interrupt for a minute, we're running out of time, but we do have one question that I think both of you might want to take a stab at in the next few moments that we have left. Bonjour from, I don't know who was asking the question, but which contemporary female figures might approach the accomplishments of the Empresses?
Oh, over to you, Nancy.
Which contemporary? Well, you know what? I have to tell you, Angela Merkel. I read her memoirs, okay? And they are so, and because somebody like me or Amanda will, 200 years from now, will do a biography of Angela Merkel, and I wanted to see what it's like to read it in the time period, it's because I know already stuff. And I will say it was for a German audience. It's very wonky, but halfway through, just before she becomes chancellor, she does stop and say, and now I must introduce you to a person who I owe so much to, and who was such an influence in my life, my hairdresser. So And so it's still, this is what's important, right?
That's so funny.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
So I think we're out of time. I'm the part of AFUSA now. I want to thank Nancy and Amanda so much for bringing to life these glamorous and influential women of the 19th century. I have read the book. It just came out, I think, last week. For everybody who's on the Zoom, rush to buy it at your local bookstore if possible. It's you can't put it down. So put aside some time this weekend and read the Rebel Empresses. It's magnificent. It's fun. It's funny. It's dramatic, tragic, everything you want in an incredible book on these amazing two women. Thank you, Nancy, and
Oh,
thank
thank
you,
you
Amanda.
very much for the opportunity. Thank you,
Thanks.
Amanda.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.